Hello, this is Janae from the Conscious Community Podcast and Conscious Community Magazine. We wanted to let you know that we have sponsorship packages available. If you are interested in sponsoring this podcast, please email Spencer at spencer@consciouscommunitymagazine.com or call or text 630-492-0831. 630-492-0831. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate all of you. Hello, welcome to the Conscious Community Podcast. This episode, we're going to be speaking with Jonathan Robinson about his book, More Love, Less Conflict. Jonathan is a psychotherapist and a best-selling author and host of a podcast as well. We'll talk about all those things and more. Welcome, Jonathan, to the Conscious Community Podcast.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, the first thing we'd like to ask you is your background as a psychotherapist, and how does that relate to your work with couples?
Well, I became a psychotherapist very young, partly to heal myself. I was I was blessed to grow up in a totally dysfunctional family, and when I was a teenager, I was kind of depressed and suicidal. So I was looking to see how to help my own situation. I read self-help books, got into psychotherapy, became a psychotherapist. I was a lousy psychotherapist. So instead of doing that, I started to write books. And I wrote books in the genre called books that Oprah likes, where if you're going to be a writer, I recommend that genre.
Yeah.
And, so for my first few books, I got on Oprah, and then I was kind of speaking to large groups. But one of the things that always interests me is that people experience a lot of difficulty in their relationships. So it's a good place to intervene with people because they feel the difficulty there. And if you can give them simple things that can help them get to a place of love quickly, then they kind of become hooked on self-help and they become hooked on personal transformation. So that's kind of where I put my energy.
And could you tell us a little bit about this book, More Love, Less Conflict, and what this book's about and what you're trying to accomplish with it?
Well, something I've noticed is that the quality of our life is very much based on the quality of our relationships. And in fact, in real estate, they have a thing where they say what's important is location, location, location. And in happiness research, they have a similar thing where they say what's important is relationships, relationships, relationships. And I started to see that most people, they may think they're good communicators, but they really are not so good. And therefore, they have a hard time working through problems. They have a hard time having happy relationships. They have a hard time creating love wherever they go. So I saw that if you can improve somebody's communication skills, which you can really do quite dramatically in an hour, their entire life transforms. Most people were unaware of these simple techniques that could really make their communication a lot better. So I decided to steal all the best communication techniques from all the different people I had talked to, whether it be Oprah or the Dalai Lama or whoever, and put them all in one book. Because I don't read a lot, so if I'm reading a book, I want it to have everything you ever needed to know in that one book. And so the book is mostly these really simple methods that take less than 20 seconds to do that will immediately help to resolve conflict or help you to get to a place of more connection or rapport or love with people that you care about.
In your book, you talk about the 4 horsemen of relationship apocalypse. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, well, what happens is when things are going poorly, people always resort to these things. I call them the 4 Ds because they start with D. One is denigration, which is really blame. So when we're upset with somebody, we always blame them, and blame never works. I've never had a time where I blamed my wife and told her what she was doing wrong, where her response was going, "Oh my gosh, you're right. Now I see what you're talking about. I'll have to change that." That never happens. I don't know about between you two, but blame never works. So that's one horseman of the apocalypse. Another one is distraction. We all have these, I call them WMDs, not weapons of mass destruction, but widgets of mass distraction. People are always relying on these things for communication, but actually texting and email and smartphones are very superficial forms of communication. I think what people want is deep communication, and these WMDs can get in the way. Another D is denial. That doesn't help. When you have a problem in a relationship, just hoping it goes away doesn't do anything. And the last one is dismissal, meaning you don't take what your partner says seriously, especially their feelings. And I hear it all the time. time, like, oh, you're making a big deal out of this, or it's not that big a deal, or you shouldn't feel that way. All those are just dismissing people, and nobody likes being dismissed.
Yeah, you do see that one a lot. People missing others, saying, "Oh, well, just get over it," type of idea. That just doesn't work. Obviously, a problem for you at that time, even if it really, in the scheme of things, is not a big problem.
I do definitely think that electronic communication can be a distraction, especially if you are in a moment when you could be having one-on-one personal interaction with someone and you're instead playing with your phone and not talking to them. But I do think there's also sometimes a generation gap that people my age and younger, oftentimes, like, they may have a hard time, say, with, well, I mean, a lot of us are really busy. We have school, work, 3 different jobs. We don't have time to spend with friends and family to get any kind of emotional, support or anything. And particularly, like, I know I have anxiety problems, and like being able to like text my friends and get emotional support no matter where I am, anytime. Like, a lot of times, this is something I ask older people to understand. A lot of times when you see a millennial with his nose buried in his phone walking around, like, he's not having a good time and he's getting emotional support from his friends. And like, you're like, oh, he's not paying attention to me, but it's like he is interacting with people just in a way that, like, I don't know, people don't use typewriters to communicate anymore. And there was a time when that was considered a very genuine way to write a letter to somebody that cared about. It's just a different medium, but I don't think it's entirely a negative thing. I think that
I agree with you.
For people who are younger,
we've
just grown up with it.
It's not an entirely negative thing, because it's like, use the analogy of food, that we need lots of different food. You don't want to just eat steak every meal. You want to have, some dessert, you want to have some vegetables. So my point is that these types of communication tend to be less nurturing at a deep level than one-to-one communication, and especially very intimate communication. We can have very intimate communication over Zoom, and later I'll show your audience how you can use very simple exercises that get very deep very quickly. So time isn't even necessary. I've had life-transforming communications with people. It took 2 minutes. But most people don't know those techniques, so they rely on things like Facebook. But 1,000 Facebook friends doesn't really equal one really good friend who's there for you for sure. And I think most people really hunger for this depth of connection that they rarely get in today's world, because we've kind of substituted quantity for quality.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I've got some ludicrous number of people on Facebook and Instagram and all this who are my friends, but like 2 or 3 of them are my actual friends. And I do very much hunger for that kind of deep connection, but like I guess it's from our younger people's perspective, it's easy to criticize that, but then the mechanisms of socialization that existed for the old generation, and I'm old enough, I'm going to be 39, so I'm old enough to remember when things like coffee shops existed, but they don't exist now. Like, there is no, like, for our generation, basically the choices, if you don't want to be totally reckless and irresponsible, are you sit home and you watch Netflix with whoever you live with, and you go to work. And outside of that, like, the only other outlet, the only other place for people to go out in public and socialize is like a bar. And then when, that can often be a dangerous environment when bad things happen to you, people go, oh, well, what do you expect? You went to a bar. And I personally run into that, and I've seen other people criticized for it too. And it's like, well, I guess I'll just stay home and watch Netflix, because if I try and go out and meet people, and something bad happens to me, like, it's a dangerous world out there. And a lot of things have changed since, our parents' generation was our age. And there just aren't the clubs and the groups and the organizations and the peer socialization that there was before. So it's easy to kind of look at younger people and say, oh, they're not having these deep connections, but it's also like, well, where are we supposed to go for that? That's just, I mean, I just hear that a lot from the older generation. It's like, hey, believe me, if there was a coffee shop open till 2 a.m. where I could go and read a book and occasionally have a conversation with people, I'd be there any minute over a bar.
Well, times definitely do change, and the technology has to change. So you're right that these hangout coffee shops don't exist and people are buried in their smartphone. But I find that if you have the right techniques of communication, people gravitate to you no matter what. Just like if I'm giving out $100 bills, just flying them around, I don't have to advertise it really loudly. People find the way to find you. And so, I went from having no friends to having, my biggest problem is that I have a lot of people who want to spend time with me. And what changed was really just my communication skills got better. And you'll see that, if you become like a vehicle for love and people really enjoy being around you and they're very stimulated and they find it very heartwarming, then people find their way to you. You don't have to even try to meet people. They just get there somehow. So what I try and do is teach people these simple skills and then see what happens. And to me, it looks like, or people sometimes say it looks like you have a superpower, that things just happen around you. But it's really just very simple stuff that, because everybody wants care and understanding and empathy. Actually, Oprah's a good example of this, because here's a woman who was so poor, she never lived in a place that had running water and never even lived in a place that had a bathroom. And then she was raped twice by the time she was 14. She was in jail. She was in the retarded people's class at school. And 25 years later, she's the most loved person on earth. So I asked Oprah, how did that happen? And she said, well, I didn't have anything going for me except for the fact that I really could give empathy and understanding to people. So I vowed that I would do that every day. And it looks like that turned out pretty good. Now, that's only one skill she has. She's really good at giving understanding and empathy. But somehow, despite having nothing in her life, no opportunities, people found a way to her and wanted to be on her team. And she's now probably the rich Black woman on earth, the most loved person on earth. And according to Barack Obama, he wouldn't have been elected without her. So maybe even the most powerful person on earth. And that just comes from that one skill. So my goal is to teach people how to do that skill and then notice how much more money they have, notice how many more friends they have, notice how much more better their relationships go. And the biggest impediment to the skill is thinking that you're already great at it.
All right.
Because most people are okay at communicating, but they don't know the absolute best ways of doing it. So they don't necessarily study it.
Jonathan, do you have any recommendations for how communication can be used in this very polarized world we live in right now, and how we can start a dialogue between two diverse worldviews?
Yeah, it's a great question, because obviously our nation's very polarized, and 1 in 3 couples actually belong to a different political party. So they have this issue very much in their marriage. And what I find is important is to understand people. If you show people that you understand them and that you have empathy for their point of view, they will then be able to listen to you. But they won't be able to listen to you until they feel really gotten. Now, one of the things I do is I work in prisons with people who've killed a bunch of people and Nazis. And I have about 99% success rate at getting them to change their view once I spend some time with them. And the way I do it, because people have wondered, how do you do that? How do you get somebody who's committed to killing people and who's been a Nazi for 40 years? How do you get them in half an hour to change their view? And the way I do it is I totally try to get that I understand their frustration, their feelings, their worldview. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. And by doing that, it lessens their defensiveness and makes them curious as to how I look at the world. Once they're curious, I can explain my worldview, and there's now a meeting of minds. Now, I am of one political party. My wife is of another political party. But we understand each other, and therefore we don't have a problem with it. Now, you look at say, the situation nationally, whether one likes or dislikes the current president, something that is easy to see is that he was brought up in the rough and tumble world of real estate in Manhattan. And he got into a certain type of communication that worked in that that realm, but is not working for 60% of Americans as president. So sometimes in order to get the next level of success, you have to learn to increase your communication skills. And that involves also in couples, learning to understand your partner, even if you don't agree with them.
And one thing
We
that
need to do that on a national level as well as an interpersonal level.
Oh, yes, definitely. One thing that was in your book that I thought was really beautiful is you talked about this mantra that you went to India to find out what it was. Would you mind telling that story, or is that the little thing in your book that you wanted?
No, I'd be happy to tell that story. Well, one of the things I saw in people who were expert communicators and really happy couples was that they had a feeling of gratitude towards each other, because your partner gets whether you're taking them for granted or whether you feel grateful for them. So a friend of mine had come back from India, and he said that he'd learned this special mantra for helping him feel incredible gratitude towards his wife. So I asked him if he would tell me what that mantra was, and he said, no, you're going to have to go to India and get directly from the guru. Well, India is a long way away, but I always want the best techniques. So I go all the way to India. It's 20,000 miles, and take a rickshaw. It's a long, hard slog through India. Finally get to the ashram, and I finally get a chance to talk to this guru. I say, can you please give me this mantra that would help me feel gratitude for the people I love? And he says in an Indian accent, yes, my mantra is the most powerful mantra on earth. And he gets ready to whisper into my ear, and I'm very excited. I'm like holding my breath because I don't want to miss a word. And he says, whenever possible, repeat the following words. The mantra I give you are the words, thank you. Well, I look at him like, that's it? I traveled 20,000 miles to get thank you? That's it? He goes, no, that's it is the mantra you have been using. And that makes the people you love feel like they're never enough. My mantra is thank you, not that's it. That's it will take you nowhere. So I'm pissed off. And so I give him a snide, well, thank you. And he looks at me and he says, thank you is not the mantra. You must say it from your heart many times a day. So when you see your partner in the morning, say thank you. When you see your child or your pet, say thank you from your heart. And soon you will feel overwhelming gratitude. And it actually does work. That many times a day when I see my wife, I thank her internally, and she senses my love for her. And things go well just by doing a simple technique like that.
Yeah, the work of Dr. Martin Seligman and positive psychology, that's one of the keys to being a resilient, happy, content person, not happy, but content, is gratitude and saying thank you and remembering to say it every day.
Absolutely.
And proven the word, though.
Yeah, anybody who's familiar with me knows I'm awful angry about a lot of injustices in the world, but I'm very grateful for the things that I do have. And one of the reasons I'm so grateful is that I realize that as bad as everything I've experienced is, there's a lot of people who have it a lot worse than me. And I had a very little taste of deprivation compared to what most people's lives are like globally. So I'm very appreciative of everything that I have, and I try to express that gratitude and let Janae know when she makes me breakfast or does my laundry or whatever else she does for me, how much I appreciate it.
Yeah, little things make a big difference. One of the techniques I recommend in the book, and we can even do it right now if you want.
Sure.
Studies show that the number one correlation with happy couples is the number of appreciations they give to each other. So the number one correlation with happy couples is the number of appreciations they say to each other. And in the book, More Love, Less Conflict, I say, well, here's just a simple fill-in-the-blank statement. Say, something I notice about you that I appreciate is. And I say that every day to my wife. I sometimes get caught up with stuff, so I actually have Siri on my iPhone remind me to do this every day. And, I've known you guys for only a little bit, but I can still, if I'm thinking certain appreciations, but if I say them, we're going to feel more connected. So Janae, something I notice about you that I appreciate is that you're often giving little suggestions that are very helpful. So it looks to me like you're just like a very helpful, kind person from the little that I've known you so far. So that's something I notice. And Spencer, I like how you're very authentic. You speak your mind. You're not somebody who is holding back. And so I kind of always know what's going on with you, because you'll say if you disagree, or you'll say this is what I want or what I'm thinking, and that makes it easy to communicate with you. Now, as I say those things, you're probably thinking, well, that guy's very intelligent.
You noticed.
He seemed very correctly there, But, that's going to make it easier for you to feel better about me. And couples or people who say their appreciations out loud tend to get along much better. Now, that's not rocket science. It's very simple, but those are the types of things that I have in the book that can help to facilitate deeper communication.
Well, as we're on the subject of appreciations, I don't know, for people who've listened to our podcast in the past and just people who are just catching us for the first time, Janae doesn't talk as much as I do, and I can run my mouth literally for 10 or 15 minutes straight, and I have to cut myself off frequently. And sometimes it may seem to people who are listening or people who have listened to us in the past that Janae's not participating. Like, this is my podcast. Like, Janae does probably 40 hours worth of work for every single podcast episode. I do an hour. Like, I show up, I talk a lot, and, you know, run the conversation and, you know, tell everybody my really important opinions and whatnot. And Janae, you know, sometimes doesn't feel heard, I think. And just for the record, I very much appreciate all the stuff she does that the audience doesn't see, that ends up with the guests that we have, the booking the appointments. Like, I flip through the books and I have a lot of opinions on all these subjects anyway. Janae tends to read the books cover to cover. She does most of the audio editing. She does the transcription. You know, by the time start to finish, by the time a single 40-minute to an hour-long podcast episode is done, Janae's put at least 40 hours into it. And, you know, and a lot of her questions are a lot more formal kind of Q&A, and that's never been my style, so that's not how I work. And because I don't come prepared with a list of questions, I'll ramble a bit, because instead of rather having like a direct question, I'm more just kind of like grasping around for a concept and then having my guest respond to it, or like where, you know, I'm thinking about this, and this, what do you think of that? And that's not how Janae works, but that doesn't mean that Janae is not an equal partner in the production of the podcast. And that's just for the podcast and the associated articles. That's not even counting all the other stuff she does for the magazine. So
that feels pretty good to hear, Janae.
Yes,
that feels
appreciate that.
Yeah. So, you know, little things like this, saying your appreciations, can make a big difference. Acknowledging people's feelings and understanding them transforms relationships relatively quickly. On my website, which you give later, I have what's called the 12 questions of instant intimacy. These are questions you can ask almost anybody, and they lead to immediately deep and intimate conversations. I was just in New York doing some workshops, and I tried it on the subway in New York, and every single time it worked. In fact, 4 people missed their subway stop because they were so interested in talking to me about the questions.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
These things can work really well, and when they do, it just makes life a lot richer.
Well, one thing that you have in your book, you talk about ways to get someone who doesn't want to participate in these communication strategies to get them to participate. I know that is a huge problem. I know lots of women who they have these communication issues with their husband or boyfriend, and he will not, usually a guy, but I'm sure there's women who do it too, that maybe she won't participate in the discussion. So what would your advice be for couples in that situation where one party knows there's a communication issue and the other party doesn't want to face?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, you know, in the dance world, it does take 2 people to actually tango. But what I have found, it really only takes one really skilled communicator to transform the communication in a relationship. And the reason why a lot of times you'll have one partner who's very hesitant is because they feel that they're not understood, or that when they communicate, they are criticized. So there's not enough safety. But if the partner who does most of the talking creates enough safety and creates enough interest and curiosity, the partner who tends to talk less or be less engaged tends to open up really quickly. For example, if I ask you, Janae, a question like, gee, what do you really love to do? What brings you your greatest sense of joy in life right now? It's unlikely you're going to say, bug off, I don't want to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm showing curiosity. I'm interested in you, so you're likely to talk. Now, if every time you open your mouth, I say, oh, that's ridiculous, or finally you're talking, and I'm doing these like subtle criticisms, you're more likely to talk a lot less. So I think the key is to create enough safety and enough acknowledgement for a partner that they feel more engaged engaged and more willing to try out new things. At least that's what I've found.
I like that. You mentioned to us that you have a podcast. Would you like to tell our listeners about your podcast? What's the name of that? And
Sure. In my opinion, the two most important things in life are being able to create love around you and being able to find inner peace. So what I've done is I've tried to find the world's experts in both these topics and steal their methods or borrow them. So the book, More Love, Less Conflict, is about how to create an atmosphere of love in your communication so that you can work out things and whether it be with your teenager, or your boss, or your husband or wife, get to a place where you feel a lot of love in your life. Now, the podcast I do is called Awareness Explorers, and people can get it at iTunes or awarenessexplorers.com. And what I do is I interview people like the Dalai Lama, or I just interviewed Rupert Spira yesterday and Deepak Chopra. I'm asking them, what are your favorite techniques for finding inner peace quickly? And the technology of being able to find inner peace is getting better and better. It used to take people years of meditation to get to where it now takes minutes of meditation or even seconds to find a deep peace within. Just like it used to take, if I wanted to talk to my wife is now in Istanbul. To talk to her 150 years ago used to take a year. Now it takes 4 seconds of calling her on this. That's a big difference. A year of effort to talk to her versus 4 seconds. So when people know the best ways to create love and peace around them, they usually go for the better technology. That's what Awareness Explorers is about.
Interesting that you talk about awareness. This is something we've come across several times. I'm very interested in technology, and artificial intelligence is one of those horizons of technology that's really getting pushed right now. And I kind of came to my own conclusion several years ago that metaphysics and philosophy and meditation and all these things, all these various studies of the nature of consciousness itself that used to be kind of dismissed by the serious academic world or dismissed by science I feel really become relevant again because we are at the point where we're trying to create machines that are self-aware, and one of the major stumbling blocks is that we cannot really define what self-awareness or consciousness is. So as I embarked on, I started out kind of reading up on this stuff and thinking about it because I was thinking about artificial intelligence, and then kind of stumbled backwards into doing this podcast that's seemingly unrelated. But as you talk about conflict and love and creating a better world with less conflict, either on an interpersonal level or on a global level, I think that helping people achieve and raise their consciousness, their level of consciousness, is a extremely crucial task. So anything that you do, whether it's your podcast or Dalai Lama does, or anything that is raising that level of consciousness, because I really feel that many people they're not really processing things on the kind of metacognitive level of thinking about these subjects that we're having in this conversation, that they're kind of in this lower state of consciousness where they're reacting to stimuli on this kind of much more base level. And I think that part of the problem resolution to these global conflicts and whatnot is to get their heads up and out of the immediacy of all this mess that's going on and up onto this level where we're talking about how do we resolve conflict, like that it's like an onion skin, and it's got these different layers of awareness, and you really have to like bring everybody's heads up. And I guess the problem I've been grappling with is how do you do that on a large scale very rapidly, because I kind of feel like we're up against a time deadline here, like we're running out of time kind of globally.
Communication, isn't it? Going back to communication.
I totally agree with you. We are running out of time. And as to how you do that, well, this is an interesting invention. This didn't exist 11 years ago. And now we do not know somebody who does not own this, who's over 15 years old. Yeah. I don't know a single person who doesn't own one. So in 11 years, the entire world that we know now uses this every single day. Now, that's because it's very easy to use and it does a lot of things. So if we could put out techniques and technologies that really made people feel a lot better very quickly and get the word out, then I think there's hope that we can transform the world. So that's why I've kind of specialized in methods that take less than 20 seconds to do. So most of the meditation methods I know take less than 20 seconds. Most of the communication methods I know take less less than 20 seconds. And that's why I think I've been able to reach a couple 100 million people, is because I'm a lazy slob and I don't do methods that take more than 20 seconds. And, it's the same thing with TV. People use TV because all they have to do is move their thumb a quarter of an inch and they have 700 channels. That's pretty simple. That's pretty easy. And we have to figure out ways to get to a place of peace and love that raise our vibration that are just as easy as that.
Well, one of the things our generation does, and kids younger than us do, and I don't think the older generation realizes how dramatic an impact it has, or that it's, and I've been saying this in all seriousness, like this is high-tech stuff, is memes. I know that the older generation is like, oh, that's stupid. I know a lot of people my age who people in their 20s, they all get it, but I know a lot of people my age who are like, I don't get it, it's stupid. Like memes are a very powerful, very tightly packed, juxtaposition of image. What they call a meme is really an image macro where you have text and an image, and you can pack so much compressed information into those. And you've seen different political factions using them to various effect. They can be incredibly powerful and persuasive. It takes you 2 or 3 seconds to come up with an idea for one and put it out there, and that one little idea has the potential to go reach hundreds of thousands of people in an hour. And if it happens to be something that people think is funny, boom, it's all over the place. And that that virality has potentially devastating consequences, or it can be a really good thing. And I think that finding ways to rapidly propagate the kind of consciousness level raising, like you're saying, the small little 20-second ideas that can raise consciousness. I think finding ways to package those up and through memes or whatever other high-tech methods, spreading that information rapidly so that as many people as possible are getting those ideas. And
good.
I think that one of the hard things is that when it comes to meditation or anything that you might broadly call like new age, or I don't mean to offend anybody, but like hippie crap, that you've got 30 years of very, very negative connotation to cut through. If you start taking
probably 50 years, if not more.
If you start talking about meditation or consciousness or anything like that, oh, that's just about drugs and like it's very difficult to have a serious conversation with certain people about any of these ideas, because as soon as you bring it up, they just shut down because they've got 50 years of connotation.
Someone like Sam Harris.
That's why I have
person to talk to. Interested in that.
There's a lot of new age publications out there, and I'm always very candid with Janae about like, look, I want to have a serious conversation about Zen Buddhism, or if I want to have a serious conversation about Kundalini Yoga, I want to have a serious conversation about it. I don't just want to sit there moony-eyed and be like, oh, that's the answer? Oh, how much do I have to pay to get the answer? Like, I think that attitude of commodifying it and reducing it to some kind of inscrutable Asian mysticism that you don't quite understand but you think is cool is ultimately very detrimental to this kind of valuable information in terms of our survival as a species. Like if we don't start taking this stuff seriously, we will not make it. So I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to like write a book about it or have a podcast. I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to be a professional and talk about the things, but I think it's very important that we have a serious discussion about them, and that the more scientific skeptical side of things, the new atheist wing of the population, give that a chance to be a conversation that is had instead of just dismissing it as.
Going back to what we were talking about with polarization.
Yeah.
Right. We want to have a discussion. It means different. I know sides of the brain is not technically right, but people still say it though.
I mean, to me,
one of the things I noticed speaking in the corporate world is I'm able to get out of this polarization by avoiding terms that are controversial.
Yeah.
Even the term meditation or certainly religion. But most people I ask people, how many people here have ever fallen in love? Everybody raises their hand if they're over 20. I say, did you like that experience? The actual experience of falling and being in love. Did you enjoy that experience? Everybody says yes. I said, if you could get that experience whenever you want in 30 seconds by doing a certain mental process process in your head, that was not in any way addictive, but you could get back to that place of love or peace very quickly, would you want that? Would you be interested? 100% of people will say yes. So then you have enrollment, and then you can teach people different methods that will hopefully get them to that place. So most people want peace. Most people want love. Most people want ecstasy. Most people want joy. And those generally are not controversial topics. So if you can teach people and they actually have that experience when they use a method, then they're interested. Then they don't have a problem with it.
Yeah. And you've got, say, various religions that will categorize a practice like, say, meditation. They will say that, well, that's evil. It's, outside of the faith, and that's some kind of witchcraft or something. So you've got those groups that will avoid, a subject, or say they won't listen to the Dalai Lama because the Dalai Lama is not in their religion, so they'll reject anything that comes from him. And then you've got, the a-religious, and they will reject anything that comes from the Dalai Lama because he's a religious leader. And then you've got, I hear the term mindfulness that's come up, but I've even now seen some groups starting to attack that term and saying, oh, well, that's just a different word for this, and that's not part of our faith.
But how many people think that love is a bad thing? Nobody thinks love is a bad thing. Nobody thinks peace is a bad thing. So if you can label things in terms of emotions rather than ideas or concepts, I find that you get more agreement.
I'm not saying there isn't a possibility of reaching them, but I think there are people who think that peace is a bad idea. And I think there are people if you want to go back to ancient Rome or ancient Greece, love was considered foolishness. And there are some who, I have said many times that I'm seeking, a truly loving relationship and partnership with the person that I want to be with, and that I will settle for nothing less than that. And I've had many people try to convince me that that doesn't exist. So I know there's people who think, like, maybe it's because they've never had it, so they don't think that it can be found. But I think there are people who don't believe in it. And I think there's also people who think that, war and violence and murder are just a natural part of the condition about it, and you just have to accept. So
yeah, that may be, but that 1 or 2%, we don't need to convert them. We just need to convert the other people to get better at finding love and peace. As I said, I work I volunteer in jails with murderers and rapists, and I find that even then, most of them may not have ever been loved, but most of them have loved a dog or a cat or a baby. So then I say, well, would you like to have that experience anytime you want? They go, yeah, how can I, especially here in this jail. So some people have given up hope, or they're cynical, but somewhere in them, they still yearn for, or have a little bit of hope that something better than just having a angry or frustrated mindset is possible. And so what we need to do is, as you say, let the best technologies out so that we can reach more people and they can find what works for them. Because that's the bottom line, what works for you.
Could you share a couple of ideas from your book as far as techniques that, like, what would you say the most important single takeaway would be?
Well, the thing that I've seen is that if you can show people that you acknowledge and understand their feelings, that they immediately relax, they stop becoming defensive and blame, and then they are better able to listen to you. Once again, Oprah's a good example. When you watch Oprah, she's not even saying much. She's mostly saying stuff like, wow, that must have been intense, or you've been through the ringer, that must have felt awful. And she's really there with the person. When people feel gotten, when they feel like they are understood and acknowledged, then it changes everything. So one of the techniques in the book is to just say, it sounds like you've been having a really hard time, or let's say somebody talks about having a hard day. You'd say, it sounds like you've had a really stressful day. That must have been really frustrating. So it sounds like that must feel is a technique. No, you have to do it appropriately to what they say, but just guessing how somebody feels will often change the communication and make them feel like you're on the same team. So that's something that you can do.
So the importance of empathy is really the key. That's the key to good communication.
Yeah, I've kind of came to that conclusion on my own. I mean, I had this own over the last few years through social social media, I've had this kind of, not necessarily looking for a Deepak Chopra or Oprah or Dalai Lama, but just finding people who are in different walks of life from me, finding somebody who's Jewish, finding somebody who lives on the East Coast, finding somebody who lives on the West Coast, finding somebody who lives in Canada, and just every possible cross section of humanity that I could think of. I tried to like find somebody on social media and develop some kind of like a dialogue with them and understand where they were coming from. And like I would kind of like, I get a conversation going on social media, and then I would tag, you know, like somebody would say, oh, well, these Christians, they only think this. And then I'd tag my friend who's like a biblical scholar and a pastor and be like, well, is that what you think? And he would wade in and be like, well, actually, you know, in my church, we say this, this, and this. And he's like, but, you know, these scientists, they always think this. And I tag my physicist friend and be like, you know, you're a scientist. And like just trying to like make it clear to them that I understand where the pastor's coming from, and I understand where the physicist is coming from. Like, and trying to get them to talk and work through these things. And like, I mean, I don't know if that has any larger value to the world, but like just for my own, you know, process, like that, I found that technique to work really well. I mean, if I had the Dalai Lama and, you know, Neil deGrasse Tyson in my friends list, I might try and get a conversation going with them as opposed to, you know, my friend who happens to be a physicist or whatever.
Yeah. It would be an interesting podcast where you took two experts from totally different fields.
Yeah. And make them fight with medieval weapons.
Well, when people feel understood by you, it also opens up the communication where they're going to be more receptive to understanding you. So when I work in jails with these neo-Nazis who've killed a bunch of people, I find that when they feel understood by me, they become very open to hearing what I have to say. And then a real dialogue happens. It's not just me saying you're an idiot and them saying you're an idiot. It's real back and forth. And that feels good because that feels alive and it feels like something's actually happening versus two people who are just talking at each other but nobody's listening.
Yeah, we're coming up to the end of that night.
Yeah, I just, as you mentioned, that I just wanted to play off that real quick. I've met plenty of neo-Nazis and plenty of openly racist people in my life, and one of them that comes to mind, he was beaten very badly as a young man, had severe injuries by a group of black kids that were older and bigger than him, and he's very venomously racist. Every time I saw him, you know, see a black person, he would, you know, as soon as they left, he would immediately make a comment about it. And I frankly, I mean, I tried to explain or rationalize or dialogue with him about the subject a million times, and I could never find any kind of, you know, like he was just very heavily entrenched in the way he was and didn't see any problem with it and felt that it was justified. And it really is kind of like deprogramming, you know, somebody who's been brainwashed into a cult or something. Like it really takes a highly refined skill set to break somebody out of that mentality. And yeah, I really am, you know, when I look at kind of the scale of things around right now, it's like, well, how do you not just do that one-on-one? How do you do that very rapidly for a lot of and that's kind of new ground. So I'm not sure exactly where to go with it, but
I think it has to be done one-on-one for the time being.
Yeah. Well,
then there is like a momentum that builds up, I think, as more and more people become more and more self-aware, really, and more in tune with themselves and more can communicate better and more receptive to love and empathy, that they spread it to others and just grows.
Well, there may be something, you know, if you've got the kind of connections to get this in the media. Sam Harris did a interview with a guy who was a former neo-Nazi and now works at deprogramming people who are neo-Nazis. And I don't know that Sam Harris has the same kind of global audience that somebody like Oprah does, but I think that sometimes maybe getting somebody who was and got out of it, like getting somebody who was in a cult and got out of it, who can now explain to people who are in that cult what it was that made them see the light. Maybe that is a productive channel to go after. I don't know anything about TV and traditional media. I've always been a new media, web, social media kind of guy. But yeah, I think anything in that spectrum that can be brought to bear on the issue is really important right now as far as what's going on in the world.
Well, before we end, his book is More Love, Less Conflict by Jonathan Robinson. It's a communication playbook for couples. And as we've been discussing, communication is important in your relationship as it is with the entire world, really. And that's what interpersonal relationships are based on, is strong communication. In that, is there anything you would like to add or share with us? Your web links, for example, or any upcoming events?
Sure. Well, they can download for free the 12 Questions of Instant Intimacy at morelovelessconflict.com. And they can, of course, order the book from there if they want. And I also encourage people to look at the podcast Awareness Explorers, which they can download for free at awarenessexplorers.com or iTunes. And always look for the simplest ways to get back to love and peace, because that's what's going to change our world, and it's also going to change the larger world. So anything that works in that direction is probably a good thing.
I agree. And I also appreciate you that not going to worry about the 1 or 2% who won't change. There's really nothing you can do. There is a point.
Yep. If we focus on changing ourselves and changing the people who want to be changed.
Eventually, yes, it's possible, but
I'm trying. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good luck with what you're doing. It sounds like you're doing important work, and keep it up. The world needs all the help it can get.
Yes, your podcast sounds really interesting.
I will definitely subscribe.
Yeah,
I many podcasts.
All right, thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Conscious Community Podcast. If you'd like more information about sponsoring this podcast or advertising with Conscious Community Magazine, in print or online, please email me at spencer@consciouscommunitymagazine.com. That's SPENCER, or call 630-492-0831.